Shabbat Shalom.
Well,
Good morning,
almost.
good morning, good morning. Bright and early
Yes,
here
right.
in California.
Yes.
It's bright and early.
Yes, that's right.
We don't
we're
have
recording.
we don't have East Coast privilege, with the time being you're midday. We're just
for
waking
once.
up.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We're not recording past my bedtime as usual.
That's true. That's true.
So we're recording on Friday, and this is the day that Israel officially signs the hostage release.
Yeah.
So hopefully, at least 33 of the hostages will be coming home soon.
Yeah. I have a feeling in my body that next week is going to be probably one of the hardest weeks in Jewish history of my lifetime. Like, I don't know how the Jewish people are going to.
And even how they're doing it, like 33 hostages over a 40-day period.
Yeah.
It's like dripping and dripping.
I know it's going to be so hard for the family. I don't. The whole thing is hard. One thing though, I did see, and then we should get on to our topic. But the hospitals in Israel, preparing to bring in the hostages, you should see what they've done. I've seen a bunch of Twitter posts about this. They've created the most beautiful rooms that are just like little oases. And they even made like rooms right off of the rooms for the families to stay. Cause they're like, the families are not going to leave. And the hostages might need time alone. So they have these like, almost like little apartments in the hospital to try and help them.
They'll try to do whatever they can to help
them. They will.
Ugh.
They will. But it's what a story. Anyway.
Yeah, unbelievable.
It's good we're talking about.
Look, let me honest. I mean, we're living in America. America is the land of opportunity. They'll go on speaking tours, make some money.
I hope so. We'll bring them here.
We'll bring them here.
I'll just say this. Maybe this last thing is, you were talking about this before we started recording, is that there was no perfect solution.
Yeah.
To this, and it's you can criticize whoever you want in the United States government, in the Israeli government, wherever, but there was not going to be the fairy tale ending.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
I think it's good that we have a new president who was able to give a different angle on this, but at the end of the day, there was only so much that was going to be done.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the things I think about, and which connects to our topic today also, is I've just felt over the last few months, I mean, obviously since October 7th and maybe even before that, but people that live with true and deep faith, I find just have an easier life. There's just, I don't know, letting go of that burden of responsibility for every tragedy and every bad thing going on in the world, and just saying, like, God runs the world. This is all up to God, whether it's, and I'm not saying it in a good or bad way. I'm just saying it in a neutral way, but just allowing that feeling to exist within you, I think is a very, very powerful tool. And I just see amongst my friends and family members who do have that deep faith, that their lives just seem to have a little bit of an easier go of it. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. It does make sense.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm plugging faith in God. Just saying, it's a good idea. So try it.
Yes.
It seems like an appropriate venue for that.
Exactly.
On a slightly different topic, before we get to the serious topic, did you send your dad Susie Weiss's article about?
No, I didn't have a chance yet. I'm sorry. So everyone, we should post it on this.
We'll put a link to it. So Barry Weiss's sister Susie wrote a memorial to a friend of hers that passed away recently from some like disease he got in Senegal or something like that.
Yeah,
and he
was young.
Max.
Yeah,
he was 39, I think.
Yeah,
but he was seemed like a very, very free spirit, interesting guy. But at the back of the article, one of the things she writes is that he was obsessed with Chabad.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had actually
a religious guy.
No,
not a religious.
No, not particularly. He was Jewish,
right?
But he had actually made a map of all of the Chabads that he visited throughout the world.
Yeah, I think he had like 32 or something.
That's
amazing. 36. Yeah,
36.
Yeah.
And he put on tefillin, right? Didn't he like put on tefillin every day?
Yeah, she wrote that he was planning to. His goal was to put on tefillin every day of this year.
Yeah.
So
That's sad.
In his memory,
I know.
Put on tefillin.
Now listen, Chabad is all over the place. It's Chabad and Coca-Cola. The two things you can find everywhere you go.
I'll write that about you. You were obsessed with Chabad and you were putting on tefillin.
Me and Max are like,
yes, exactly.
Anyway, so last week we talked about a really fun topic.
Yes.
Of divorce. So we figured let's have an even more fun topic to talk about. So the topic we're going to talk about today comes from, originally Haile and I started talking about it from a piece that Coleman Hughes wrote about his mom. And it was essentially his mom. It's a great, we'll link to this article in the Substack as well. But his mom contracted a very terrible form of cancer and died just a horrible death. And it was basically his article arguing in favor of euthanasia laws. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we said, well, that's probably a good topic for us to cover is talk about the Jewish perspective on that.
Yeah.
So that's
it's also a big topic in the political world, because in Canada, they pass laws for end of life. Some states have it. So it's definitely something people think about. And I think it's like a very relevant.
It's interesting because when the word first came up, I thought they were talking about young people in Asia. Euthanasia. I cannot understand. What's the big issue about euthanasia? It's so controversial.
That's next week's topic. Don't give it away.
So controversial. What are young people doing in Asia that we're all like have such a huff and a puff in Washington about? Let them do whatever they want in Asia.
They're not having babies. That's what they're not doing.
Yeah. Well, whatever the issue is, Chabad can fix that.
Yeah.
So. If you're a euthanasia, then no problem. Come to your local Chabad and we'll help you.
Exactly. But like Haile said, it's a very relevant topic generally today, because there's a lot of discussion. A lot of countries are passing various laws of different types around this topic. And as the rabbi said, certain states in the United States are passing laws around this. So we thought it would be a good discussion to talk about the Jewish perspective on it.
Yeah.
So where do you guys want to start?
Well, I think that we should start, first of all, from the Torah's perspective on life in general, how Torah looks at life. So, and we know, we've talked about it early on in the Torah, God creates Adam from dirt. He breathes into him this breath of life. Adam gets up from Adam's rib. He creates woman, and that's how the human race begins. And God implants in Adam and Eve this idea that life is very, very important. And, he tells Noah, we talked about this when we previously, when it comes to murder, that I will, seek revenge for anybody that murders anybody else. And, if you do that, and we talked about capital punishment, that if you witness him doing that, Judaism believes in capital punishment. This is all based upon the idea that Judaism finds life sacrosanct. It's absolutely sacred, and take it even one step even further, that it doesn't belong to you. Life is a gift that was given to you by the Almighty, and you need to cherish that and watch it. You should be careful in what you eat and how you take care of the body, etc., etc., etc. And that's Judaism's plain view on what life is. And to extend that, even when we look into the book of the chapter of Noah, when God talks to him about revenge on murder, he even says there that God will also seek revenge on someone that takes their own life, on suicide. Now, what is God really going to do about someone that how can you take revenge on someone that commits suicide? That's a different topic. But there you see that even harming yourself and killing yourself from the perspective of the Torah is a sin. And that's where we can start from.
Okay.
Knowing that, what the Torah's point of view is, suicide is prohibited in Judaism.
Right. Now, to complicate, I know this isn't really about suicide, but before we get to the particulars of ending life early for terminal patients, like there are stories in history, for example, the story of Masada, which is a bit of a complicated story, which I happen to know a lot about now because I just took a class on it.
Why don't you tell us about? Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your class? What was the class about?
No, I'm not going to. But we celebrate to some degree. I mean, well, the rabbis don't celebrate it, but that was a mass suicide. Are there times in Judaism that you're supposed to choose suicide over something, over a sin?
I think that was at Masada and other places. I think it was an emotional decision because what you take into effect is what is going to happen to us if the Romans overtake us. They're going to sell us in Rome. We'll become slaves. Who knows? We'll be separated from our families. Our children will grow up to be slaves in Rome. It's a different culture. So if we're going to lose our spirituality and if they're going to kill our soul, then okay, you know what? I'd rather let my soul live than kill my body.
Right.
That's
the rabbis don't praise the supposed heroes of Masada. They don't even reference them really at all. I don't think they approved of it. But anyway, go on.
So look, there are cases. Right. There are cases, 3 specific mitzvahs that you have to allow yourself to be killed rather than transgress them. Most of the mitzvahs, if someone forces you to eat non-kosher, you eat non-kosher or desecrate Shabbos.
You don't kill yourself.
You don't kill yourself.
Right.
You don't allow yourself to be killed. But there are 3 which you have to, since Yarig va'lo yavar, you should allow yourself to be killed and not transgress them. So obviously that there are times and situations where your life will be secondary to the idea of martyrdom.
Right.
Like someone asks you to commit adultery. You can't, you have to allow yourself to be killed or murder someone else or do, or idolatry.
Right.
So these are 3 mitzvahs. And it extends even more. I mean, those 3 we know about, but even in times when a guy wants to make an example of you, like they'll put you in the square, in the town square and make you eat a bacon sandwich. Probably at that moment you have to allow yourself to be killed because it's not the bacon that he wants you to eat. It's the humiliation. It's the humiliation.
Yeah, right.
So so there are many examples in the Talmud where you're allowed, but these are all forceful things.
Right, these are not the same.
None of these examples we gave were willingly.
Right.
That someone wakes up in the morning and says to themselves, "You know what? I just want to, I want to burn myself," like the monk did in Vietnam, the famous monk. What's that word? Emolated?
Self-immolated.
Self-immolated, in Vietnam. No, that's not part of what Judaism.
Right, we don't do that.
We don't what Judaism is.
So are there? So I'm glad you brought that up, Haile, because I think that I wanted to talk about the difference between suicide and euthanasia because I mean euthanasia is just suicide under different circumstances.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there? So let me ask this: I assume this is discussed in the Talmud.
Yes, it is discussed in the Talmud. Not to the extent of physician-assisted suicide, but more or less. I don't think they had those. I don't think they had the technology.
Dr. Kevorkian was not around.
Was not around. He was not around back then. But certainly, we deal with the issue that to hasten death is prohibited.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that if someone is going to pass away, it is prohibited to do anything that is going to hasten their death.
Right.
Like even to the point of, when someone is in the throes of death, we call them a goses. They're in the throes of death. They're about to pass away. You can't touch them. You can't hug them. You can't do anything to them because every motion that you do towards them may hasten their death. Right. So it's, even if the person is going to die already, so that is prohibited. So anything that's going to hasten someone's death is out. So if you extend that to present day America, a physician-assisted suicide is prohibited.
Right.
I don't think and there won't be any rabbis in the world that are going to give you a heter, going to give you some permission to do that, to quicken your death.
That's what I was going to ask. Are there any rabbis?
No.
Historically, that differ in their opinion of that?
No. Now, the only question that remains to be answered is, to what extent do we have to go to extend life?
Right.
If someone is, God forbid, have a terminal disease and the doctors tell him you have 3 weeks to live, but there happens to be an experimental drug that if you happen to go to Luxembourg and they're working on that drug, what to what degree am I responsible to extend my life?
Right.
So that there is where more questions come in, because there you're not you could take the approach of cheval tasse, I'll do nothing,
Right.
let nature take its course, and then whatever will happen will happen, like. So that's that's the questions where rabbis are grappling with these days, because more and more technology is coming out,
right,
and more experimental drugs are coming out that could extend life. Now, many of them are still what I call experimental. They're not guarantees, because if there was a drug that will guarantee to extend life, then most rabbis will say probably take it, depending upon pain.
Right.
Like, is it painful to take the drug? I mean, there are drugs that will just I had this case just a few weeks ago where a congregant called me and begged me. He was suffering from this terrible cough and inflammation of the throat, and he was so uncomfortable, and begged me to allow him to just end it. Just
to end his life.
To end it. To end his life. And I said to him, no, there's so much more you're able. Well, he passed away.
He did?
He passed away.
Oh.
He passed away. He didn't end his life,
right?
But he passed away. So if you're going to have a drug, an experimental drug, that's just going to, delay your life, but you're going to be in terrible pain, do you need to take it? Should you take it? Are you allowed to take it? So there's where rabbis disagree on.
So I have a silly story, but you just reminded me when you were talking about hastening death at the end.
Right.
But you and I were once, it's an embarrassing story on my part, but I'll tell it anyway. But we were once at the bedside of a woman in our community who was all alone, and she was passing away. Do you remember? And I was I was close with her. So you and I said we were going to stay with her until she passed away. But I didn't realize how long it takes at the end, because it's slow, right? And you don't have control over how slow it is. And I had things to do that day. So I kept saying to my father, like, how long do you think this is going to be? And he pulled me out of the room and he yelled at me. He's like,
the lady is dying. Kayleigh's like whispering in her earshot. Can't she hurry up a little bit?
No.
Yes, you did. Can't she go? I got to go. I have an appointment with my nail lady. No. I got to do my nails.
No, it was not
hurry
that.
Up a little bit.
No, I had 4 kids at home, and they were waiting for me.
Yeah, they were waiting for you.
But I'm just saying that thank God, I've had a very privileged life. I never had to experience someone dying.
Anybody that is listening to this podcast or would ever get a hold of this podcast, don't invite Kayleigh to your death party. Oh my God. Please. It's not going to be a sympathetic
no,
party.
It goes very slow.
If you lay around your bed,
if you insist on inviting her, just make sure you fit into her schedule. So
fit into her schedule. Don't drag it out. If you stop breathing, just do that quickly.
Just be considerate. Send her an invitation. So put it on her calendar.
Yeah. No, I just remember, whatever. I learned a lot that day. I'm telling this embarrassing story because I'm helping others understand that at the end, sometimes it takes a long time and you have to just be patient. That's all. So anyway.
I think most people understand that, without having told that, okay.
Anyway, okay.
Don't bring a sandwich into the room and start eating in front of them. Oh, we're so sorry you're dying soon. But, it's lunchtime and Jay told me I have to eat before 2 o'clock. 1:30.
The thing I like about that story is it makes me feel so much better about myself.
Oh, my God.
Yes. Yeah. I'm telling you.
Wow. Wow.
So, all right. So going hard right turn here.
Yeah, sorry.
Rob, you were talking about.
It's a story you tell on the Christmas tree. You sit around.
You were talking about the experimental drugs, and that was one thing I wanted to ask you about is the different. And I think you sort of answered this, but maybe we can put a finer point on it. The difference in perspective of passively allowing someone to die versus actively euthanizing them.
Right.
Okay.
The difference perspective there.
Sure. So actively euthanizing them is forbidden. In Orthodox Judaism, no way. The rabbis will not give you any kind of permission to do that, even if you're suffering, even if it's terrible. And you want to. I understand sometimes you're at a bedside, and then your heart goes out to these people. But assisted is not. Now, to what extent do you have to now take upon yourself to extend life? There already there's parameters. So there are people that sign what we call a do not resuscitate, a DNR.
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
if I'm in a position where I come into the hospital and I'm stopped breathing, don't do that. That's okay. That's that. You don't have to go to extraordinary situations. Just let it be. Let it be. There's a story in the Talmud where the rabbis were praying for the health of a person. He was already dying, and the rabbi's maidservant said, "Please stop praying. No, don't pray anymore." And they stopped praying. The person died, and she was right. In the sense, because all you were doing is prolonging the person's suffering. There's no what's the reason of prolonging the suffering if there's no hope? So extraordinary precautions, and people need to really understand this clearly, because I know a lot of us love our parents, and love our family members, and God forbid someone ends up in the hospital and they need like a breathing tube, and the doctors will say, "Hey, you know what? I'm sorry to say there was an accident, and they're really bad off, and do we want to put in a breathing tube, a feeding tube?" You have to be prepared for this, because once you do that, taking it out may be problematic. So the doctor will say, "Well, they're brain dead, but they're still breathing through a machine." Maybe a little bit problematic, doing that. So you have to really, if your parents are getting older and frail, the family really needs to sit down and make some decisions. And if you want to sign a DNR, probably a good idea, just to say, "Hey, you know what? If I'm gone, I'm gone. Just
Right.
leave me be." Now, there are circumstances, of course, where someone is diagnosed with a serious disease and there are experimental drugs. The rabbis will then break into different opinions whether you should, or whether you have to, or whether you shouldn't. That's common, now. So some rabbis take a very strong stance that no matter what, you should try. Like, even if it's experimental, and even if there's a little bit of pain, and even if it's not more than 50%, but you should try to do that, because that's part of extending life, and God wants you to do that. Other rabbis are much more lenient and say you never have to do that. You don't have to wait for the 50% threshold, for that. And it doesn't matter whether it is, even if it's more than 50%, but if it's painful. So, and then there's middle of the road rabbis that will take statistics into account, and, let you know whether you should or you shouldn't. Again, based upon the person. If a person is 96 years old, chances are that rabbis will say, "You know what? Why?"
Right.
You want to put the person through that. If the person is 17 years old, and young, and is relatively healthy, and maybe could withstand, the experimental, drugs, then the rabbis would probably insist maybe
Right.
try it.
I think it's really helpful in many situations. I mean, thank God I haven't been in this situation. Hopefully I never will be. But I think it's really helpful to have kind of the outside perspective of a rabbi to help guide you through these decisions, because, a family member who's trying to make these decisions on the fly, who are, overly emotional or not understanding all the intricacies of what will happen. And, not always do you want to trust the doctor or understand where the doctor's coming from. Having the perspective of a rabbi and asking somebody to help you make that decision can be really freeing, I think, for a lot of families who are dealing with a terrible medical emergency.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes it gets very difficult, because the family may want to extend this person's life more than the person wants to extend it.
Right.
So you're sitting in a room, and the doctor's explaining, "Look, that we could do things, but it's going to be painful." And the family goes, "Well, we want it because we want Dad, please, And why?"
Yeah.
And then the patient says, "Why?" So there, the rabbis are, if it's a painful experimental drug, the majority of rabbis, there may be some, but the majority of rabbis will allow you to decline it. If it's not painful, but it's not very useful, I mean, we don't know, then most rabbis will say, no, you should try it. Some rabbis, like Rav Moshe Feinstein, even in that case where there's a non-painful drug, but it was experimental, said, "No, you could
don't have
decline
to.
it.
Right.
You could decline it. You don't have to." I mean, if it's time to go, it's time to go. But
what if someone has cancer, a recurring, like a second time around? Do they have to take treatment, or could a person say, like, I don't want to treat it, I just want nature to take its course? Is that
yes?
Is that okay?
Yes, you can do that.
Can do that.
You can do that. For example, like declining some basic things like oxygen. You can't, if a person comes in and you need oxygen, that you can't decline.
Right.
That you have to, because, you know, like
to breathe,
to breathe, you have to decline, or hydration. Okay, we're not talking about food, but hydration, where a person is going to suffer terribly, you know, being
with no water.
With no water.
Yeah.
No water. So there you can't decline, but experimentally you can't. But basics you can't. You can't.
How do you advise families that come to you and, you know, their parent is very elderly? And I know this is going to sound callous, but I think this is like a common issue, right? Like, it's costing a fortune. The parent is very elderly. They're not really aware, you know, they're sort of half maybe aware of what's going on or whatever. I mean, how hard, again, I don't want to sound callous, but how hard do people have to fight for a relative? Or as a rabbi, how do you handle that kind of situation?
There's some basic things you can't deny the person.
Right.
For example, starvation.
Right.
You want your father to die of starvation?
No, God forbid.
Of course not. You can't do that. You want your father to be in these throes of not having no oxygen, so he chokes himself to death.
Right.
You don't want that either. So those basic things, I would say to the family, you have to provide.
Have to do.
Now, to go outside and, you know, and to start researching and to fly him to Houston or to fly him to Seattle, you know, to do that. No, that you don't have. That you don't have to do. But basic, simple things that that just to make him comfortable. Yeah. What kind of a person would do
otherwise? Right.
What kind of person? Like I've had cases where people say, I don't care, Rabbi, I'm putting in a feeding tube. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He's not dying of starvation.
Yeah.
He survived Auschwitz, and he's not going to die in the hospital because of malnutrition. Right. Let him die of anything else, but he's not dying of malnutrition. But then, of course, then you get the problem when can you take it out? Can you take it out? A respirator? You know, then it becomes complicated.
Right.
Then you have to start thinking about, okay, you know what, when he dies, the doctor said he's dead.
Yeah.
Your father died, but he's still breathing when he's dying, but he's brain dead. His heart stopped. His brain,
Jay, do you have a sense of, like, what is the moral calculation that the Western world makes when it comes to doctor-assisted suicide? Is it only about suffering, or is it free will, or do you have a sense of that?
I'm glad you asked me, because I definitely represent all of Western civilization.
You do.
With
you're the one who reads books, so that's why
my vast knowledge of all things humanity. I mean, I can speak for myself. Let's just say I'll give my perspective on it.
Okay, go. Good.
It's if I guess the issue is if, and I'll use Coleman's article as an example, right? His mom was not just terminally ill, but was suffering severely for quite some period of time. And so for me, you know, his article is obviously supporting euthanasia, and to me, in that instance, I think it's hard for me to accept that it's morally wrong to end someone's suffering when there's no hope. It's not like there's a 0.1% chance that, you know, someone could survive this thing. It's there's no hope, and she's suffering. So, in that instance, I think most people are perfectly fine in that circumstance.
Right. They sympathize with that. Yeah.
Yeah. The issue I have, and this is not an issue so much with Coleman's article, but with the overall concept of government supported euthanasia, is there's two instances I have a lot of concerns. One is in fringe cases, like people who are suffering from depression.
Right.
that to me is, I don't know how that's acceptable. And
Right.
as someone who suffered from, I mean, I was clinically depressed when I was younger, so I suffered from depression. So I'm not just speaking about this in the abstract, but
Mm,
I don't know how. Um, I mean, it's one thing as an individual to make the decision. It's another thing for the government
mm.
to
Sanction it. Yeah.
prescribe that.
Yeah.
The other issue, and this is sort of a more generalized issue I have with it, is I have a major problem with countries who have socialized medicine
Mm.
also having euthanasia,
Right.
state sponsored euthanasia,
Right.
because the incentive structure is
Yeah.
totally screwed up in that
Right.
case.
Right.
Because
Conflict of interest. Yeah.
I mean, totally. I
Yeah.
mean, because we know in countries like Canada and England, they have massive issues with delivering care
Mhm.
to people.
Right.
And so now for those countries to also have euthanasia and
Right.
just say, oh, well, we can like offload these people to that
Yeah.
system. I have a massive
Yeah.
moral issue with that.
That's a great
So
point.
so to me, the thing with Coleman's mom, like to me morally, that's like a total no brainer. But that's also to me a very clear cut
Right.
circumstance. It's the edge cases that make me much more concerned about
Yeah. Yeah.
the government's policy in particular.
Well, I think where we would kind of divide and separate would be, I think euthanasia starts again from this wonderful principle of what we call human rights.
Mm.
And we here in the West have made human rights the most important principle and value that we have. Nothing supersedes your right to do what you feel is right to do for you. And when we have that at the pinnacle of our moral authority, so therefore, why not euthanasia? Why not? If my rights extend to my well-being when I'm alive, I should be able to do that too when I pass.
Mm.
I should be able to settle when I want to go. No one else, because this is all part of who I am and the rights that were given to me by Western society. And I think that's where Judaism would differ, because human rights is not the most important value that we have.
Mm.
Our most important value that we have is our faith.
Mm.
And our faith, like Haile, you started off in the morning with the idea that people of faith put their trust and their in the hands of the Almighty and say to Him, "Modani lefanecha." I wake up every morning with thanks to you that you have given me life, and I trust in you, and I care, and I know that you care for me, and whatever you do is going to be the best for me somehow. And even when I'm in this position of suffering, I know that whatever is going to be is going to be, and not because I'm in charge, but you are in charge. But at the same time, there's no reason why you can't alleviate that suffering with drugs. I mean, there's morphine and other kind of drugs, and you do the best that you possibly can to alleviate the suffering. But ultimately, the decision of life and death is not ours. It's basically not ours. So that's one difference that we would have with Western society's view on euthanasia. The second, which I fear, and you've touched upon this, Jay, is the slippery pole. Meaning, yes, this lady, 98 years old, suffering terribly, still she has to be able to make the decision herself. No one else here in the Western world can make the decision for her. She has to be of sound mind, and physicians have to, testify that she's okay and has made the decision, and then physicians will help her achieve her her end goal. I'm just worried because in America we know there's no idea of limitations.
Right.
I mean, as soon as we allow something, there's no limits to this. There's no going back. Words. So what happens is, someone 98, cancer, suffering, we're going to allow them. Okay, next case, 98, cancer, but not suffering. But still, dying. Okay, we'll allow that. Right. Okay, 98, no suffering, no cancer, but dementia, beginning stages of dementia. Okay, not suffering. There's no, but they're suffering from dementia, early stages, because you have to have the person of sound mind to make that decision. Okay, fine.
Right.
We'll allow that. Okay, next. 98, with dementia, doesn't know what's going on, with cancer and suffering. Okay? So you have dementia, cancer,
That
suffering.
seems fine.
98. What do you say, family? So now it's not the person anymore because
Right.
we've now given the family the right. Yeah,
Right.
of course. I mean, of course. My mother definitely would have wanted to end now. There's no question about it. My mother would have wanted. Okay, next. Then you go down. What about 68? With dementia, no suffering, the family. Yeah,
It's
take him
true.
out. Because when I'm going to. So this is what happens in America. So before you know it, okay, you know what? The kid was in prison, for who knows what. Okay, yeah, good.
Oh
Take
my
him out.
God.
And this is what's going to happen. I mean, there's no question about it. It's a slippery pole, and once we allow society to start making these decisions, there's no end to it. There's no end.
I think your depression point is actually a really important one because there was a case, I don't remember which European country, but recently there was a case of a young girl who had severe depression, clinical depression, and they agreed to allow her to end her life. And she was maybe I can't remember the details, but maybe 19, maybe 21.
Yeah,
and I mean, I can't think of a sadder story. I mean, I feel bad that she was suffering and it's terrible, but I mean, could you imagine humanity just saying like, okay,
No.
you feel depressed, you're ready to give up, we're with you, we support you. I mean, that's just a terrible precedent.
And then the next step is where you can make the decision.
Yeah.
You're in such a depression.
Right.
The person is such a depression.
Well,
it
right.
will make the decision for you.
Right.
The family will make the decision for you. And it's just like it's nonstop.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, when you talk about the 98-year-old mother that's suffering, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to watch them.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. But it's heartbreaking to watch anybody pass away. I mean, like that. But ultimately,
absolutely.
it again comes down to values and where you set your priorities and where how you have the hierarchy, of principles and values. And if human rights this is what it is in America, it's certainly not a religious value. But if that's the highest, then of course, then why not? You make the decision.
I have this is a very touchy question, but I want to ask it because, there are situations with, let's say a child is very, very ill. And I mean, ill to a point where they're not even awake, right? Like it's maybe a brain dead child or whatever.
Yes.
And the family is just being torn apart by it, right? The parents are in the hospital all day. The other kids are home suffering. Like, how do the rabbis balance what takes priority in a situation like this, right? Is there room in Jewish law to say to a family like that, like, listen, we understand that you want your child to live as long as possible, but your other children and your mental health and your well-being is really paying a price right now. Do rabbis have that kind of leeway within Jewish law to say something like that?
You don't have to extend it to the pain of the family. I had a case here many years ago of a child that choked on a piece of bread.
Yeah,
he lost oxygen for about maybe 17 or 18 minutes. The paramedics were able to somehow get him
the heartbeat
again, but he was brain dead, and he came into the hospital and he lingered there, in the bed. He was brain dead. And the doctors finally told the family, look, either, you pull the plug or take him somewhere else. But there's no reason to keep him here in the hospital because he's dead.
Right.
Well, they called me. I wasn't ready to make that decision.
Oh, boy.
I was not ready to make the decision. So I called Moshe Tendler. Moshe Tendler was maybe the world's foremost expert on these issues, or at least one of the world's foremost issues. Luckily, he picked up the phone. I said to him, Moshe, my name is Al Perlmutter. I told him the case. He told me, ask the doctors a couple of questions, like is there any movement in the brain? Once he established that he was brain dead, he said, pull the plug.
Really?
Yes, he said you could pull the plug.
Wow.
If the person was dead, you can pull the plug. So there are times when the rabbis will allow you to do that. It doesn't matter whether family is suffering or not.
Right.
We're focusing here on the person.
Just on the individual.
Are they alive or not alive?
Right.
If they're not alive,
but so I want to just I want to hone in on one piece here, just because I want to understand the relationship between a rabbi and his congregant or the family, right? So let's say you would observe a family going through that. Would you ever go to the family and say, like, I want to advise you
yes.
to take this next step and
Yes.
to pull the plug?
If the
Because I'm
person-
watching you
If the person,
decline.
if the person, God forbid,
Yeah.
if the person is dead, I mean,
Right.
halachically
Brain dead. Right.
Halachically dead. Now,
Right.
there was between Rabbi Tendler and Rabbi Bleich, two of the giants, in this
Yeah.
world, there was a great argument as when does death occur? That's a
Okay.
whole different other
Right.
argument of when exactly death happens. Is it the heart stops? Is it the temperature falling? Is it
Right.
the brain functioning not? So there's difference of opinions, and Bleich and Tendler writing these long arguments about back and forth. And this is a scientific question
Right.
that
right.
we, the rabbis, have to decide. But if the person was halachically brain dead, but the people were just there saying, we can't. We can't. This is our child. I mean, we're just not going. We're just not going to do it. Yes, I would probably advise them. I'd say, look, you know what? You have to move on sooner or later. I mean, if they couldn't, they couldn't. But if you're halachically allowed, and I would go again to Rabbi Tendler, unfortunately passed away several years ago, but Rabbi Bleich is still alive, and there are other rabbis now that are experts in this, and I would consult with them. And if they said, hey, you know what, this patient meets the criteria, then I would say do it.
Right.
There's no mitzvah to prolong the pain. The problem is here is it's to me as a rabbi, this is an intellectual, rational question.
Right.
Is he dead or is he alive?
Right.
To parents, this is not a rational question. This is our child, and we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And
then you don't.
Then you don't.
Right.
Well, what are you going to do?
Right.
You can't force anybody. You can't force anybody to pull the plug.
Do you remember that case, Terry Schiavo?
I was just going to bring that up with Terry Schiavo.
I just thought of that.
Well, that's again legally. That was legally. So who's in charge of her? Who's in charge? The husband wanted to pull, and the parents did not want to pull.
Yeah. So the background for any younger listeners is she was in her 20s, and she went to cardiac arrest and had severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation, and she was in a persistent vegetative state, and she had she could not communicate with the outside world in any way, any meaningful way, and she could breathe on her own, but she had a feeding tube for all of her nutrition, and so to your point, Rabbi, her husband said she wouldn't want to live this way. We should let her die. Her parents disagreed and said that they should continue to keep her medically alive. And so this went through it must be 15, 20 years of legal, in courts and out of courts and all sorts of different things around what should happen to her. And ultimately, she was taken off her feeding tube, and he
won.
And she passed away.
The husband one was able to.
In my case, it would be the opposite. My father would be like, "Stop feeding her." And Baruch would be like, "Keep feeding her."
No, God forbid.
God forbid.
God forbid. Yeah. These are tough.
So it's sad.
Tough.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, to make light of everything, because in America,
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make a joke.
Not you, but there was a skit on Saturday Night Live, with Steve Martin.
Oh, my God.
Coming into a room where his friend has been 20 years. I guess this was during the Terry Schiavo situation.
Yeah.
And he's then and the monitors there are they're flatlining. And Steve Martin says, listen, I'm going to do him a favor. And, I'm just going to you can't pull the plug, but he walks over to the side of the room and he wraps the plug around his leg and, casually
trips over it.
Trips. And as he's pulling out the plug, the patient wakes up.
Oh my God.
The patient miraculously wakes up and sees the plug wrapped around Steve Martin's leg and is now accusing him of trying to kill him. Were you going to pull the plug? No, I wasn't going to pull the plug. I was going to pull the plug. So why is it wrapped around your leg? I mean, no. I just happened to be here. And they get into this terrible argument about the
God.
humor and society satire. I mean, there's nothing sacred. Nothing sacred.
No.
That's
how we get through it.
If there was one guy who's not Jewish who I wish was Jewish, it's Steve Martin. It's Steve Martin.
That's so funny.
I love Steve Martin.
Incredible. It was incredible.
So I have a question related to suicide, because I think a lot of people are going to wonder this, and I think we should address it.
Sure.
Is it true that if someone commits suicide, they can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery?
No.
That's not true.
Not true.
Okay.
Not true.
Because that's always been
That's
like
always
a
been-
rumor.
All right. So years ago, maybe, in the Middle Ages, there were people that were, thought that suicide is your own decision. I mean, you're a healthy person, and you decide, no, I'm going to do this. So they look down on it, that suicide was a horrible and a terrible thing, and there may have been even a period where you don't bury him in the cemetery, but there's a special place for these kind of. We realize today that suicide is a mental illness.
Right.
I mean, no one healthy is going to say to themselves one day and just wake up and say, you know what, I'm just going to end it today.
Right.
Today, I'm doing great. I'm making money. I love my family. I'm healthy. It's a beautiful day here in California. But just to change bases, I'm just going to shoot myself.
Yeah.
No one's doing that. We understand that suicide comes from terrible, terrible depression. A lot of pain. Terrible amount of mental pain and suffering and anguish. So you look at them like any other person that's ill.
Right.
Someone dies of cancer, someone dies of cardiac arrest, or someone dies or whatever. You bury them. So the same thing is true with suicide. I mean, and suicide is even more because when someone passes away, the family has to grieve, and and this with suicide, not only does a family grieve, but now there's a tremendous amount of guilt that is placed upon them. I mean, and we know now in our society the amount of teenage suicides since COVID has skyrocketed. That's why we know in our own community, there's several cases of. I'm not talking about our shul, but a short community, but in the general community, that there's been some suicides and it's devastating for the family. I mean, absolutely devastating. And college kids, high school kids. And so, you have to be in these cases 50 times more compassionate to the families than you have to be when someone like a 96-year-old father passes away. It's sad, but he lived his life, and we have great grandchildren standing there at the graveside. Okay, you're doing the eulogy, but for a suicide, it's
I mean, it's especially. I mean, suicide's obviously awful in any circumstance, but it's especially awful. Considering, have you heard about the people have been interviewed who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived?
Yeah.
So they've interviewed people who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to try to commit suicide and have survived.
Right.
Yeah.
And nearly every single one of them, as they're falling, saying, "Why did I do this?" Almost every single one of them.
Yeah.
It's a fleeting thing.
Right.
It's obvious time. It's not this persistent thing. It's a moment. It's a short-term reaction to something.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, who hasn't for a second in their life thought like, well, maybe not.
I'll tell you who hasn't.
Maybe not.
I'll tell you who hasn't. I'll tell you. We have a Rabbi Kunin is the regional director of Chabad. Big personality, very forceful personality. Well, he was, at the time I was very close to him. So one day I'm sitting in his office, and it's a fifth floor in Westwood. And I said to him, Rabbi, can I ask you a question? I said, in the days when you were like $18 to $20 million in debt, and the entire town was after you, there was nowhere you could go without people chasing you for money. If you were sitting here in the office, did you ever contemplate jumping out of the window and committing suicide?
Really? You asked him that?
I asked him that. So he looked at me and he said to me, Perlmutter, suicide? Never. Homicide? Every day. Every day I thought of committing homicide, killing someone else. But suicide, why should I kill myself? He had this fantastic, idea about himself.
Yeah.
Why should I kill myself? I did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
The $18 million that I spent, I don't have a big house.
No, he didn't.
I spent it on the community.
Right.
Homicide, yes, there were people I wanted to kill every day.
That's great. That's great.
That attitude, I still remember.
He's probably thinking, all of the reasons I want to commit suicide are because of other people, so I can just solve the problem very simply.
I'll even tell you something else, Perlmutter. He said, in all the years that I was in $20 million in debt, I never missed a night's sleep. When I lay down to bed, I slept soundly. Wake up in the morning, war. There was a war.
Wow.
But at night, I slept soundly. So that's an attitude.
That's a person of faith also.
That's a person of faith and of attitude that, you know what, it's going to be what's going to be. Doesn't mean that I don't have pressure, had a lot of pressure, but he just put it in perspective. Homicide every day. Suicide
That's
never.
Interesting. I don't know if we've ever just... Oh, go ahead.
You had a question, Hailey.
No. Go ahead, Jim. I'll say it after.
I was going to tell a quick story that I think I'm not a psychologist, so like this is not a medical prescription to solve people's problems. But I'll say for me personally, we went on my wife and I for our honeymoon. We went to Thailand and Cambodia, and especially in Cambodia, you go there and you see how people live. And there was one night I remember vividly. We were in this town called Siem Reap, and we were at this little cafe having dinner, and these two little girls, probably like 9, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that, come up to us, and they're trying to sell us postcards, and they obviously need money. So now this restaurant, we could have, for the price of the food, we literally could have bought the entire restaurant and given it to them.
Right.
But we just took the menu and said, just pick out some stuff you want. And we just, obviously they don't speak English, but we just sort of they pointed to some things and we bought them the food, and, we gave them the food. And I remember that so vividly because it really made me realize that all the things that most of us worry about in our day-to-day lives and that make us miserable are 99.9% of the time completely insignificant, and none of the stuff actually matters.
Yeah.
And it's mostly we make our own misery. And then you go to a place like that where people live in grinding poverty, who just fairly recently had a genocide, 40, 50 years ago had a genocide. And then you come back to America and like people are worrying about what kind of cars they drive and, how big their houses are and what zip codes they live in.
You don't get your food on time at a restaurant.
Right.
You're 3 minutes late. You're like swearing. And
so I would encourage people, for your next vacation, don't go to Lake Como. Don't go to Paris to go shopping.
Don't tell me what to do. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Go to some place like that where you can really see how and this is not a small percentage of the world. I mean, this is the majority of the world lives like this. So go to a place where you can experience that life, and you will have a very different perspective on everything going on in your day-to-day concerns.
So just to add to Jay's story about being a nice guy and buying food for people, I just want to share this little story about myself.
Oh,
okay, make myself feel good. Jay made himself feel good now.
Yeah,
now I'm gonna make myself feel good now.
Oh, good. I have a story too.
Trust me. The food I think cost like $25. So this was not like a big.
All right.
So
here's a sad story. Okay,
Oh.
here's a sad story. So one day we're in Israel, me and Hani are in Israel, and we decided let's go to the cave of the patriarchs, to Hebron.
Oh.
Okay, to Hebron, you're going to take a special bus, and you're going to this, because, it's the other side of the green line. Anyways, we come to Hebron.
Is this the pizza story?
What?
Yes. You told this story.
I told the story already? I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's all right.
I wanted to be a big shot. Oh, yeah, no problem. Feed 10 of these guys. Okay, 303 shekels, 180 shekels, nothing. 180 shekels. No, give it another 10. Yeah, okay. Come back, it's dollars.
$500 later.
Okay, $500 later.
You learned a lesson.
I fed 2 guys a pizza and a Coke for $500. Okay, that's Israelis. That's a difference between the Cambodians and the Israelis. So Cambodia, you can buy for $25 you can feed a village.
It's true.
And in Israel, they only put it in small letters, American dollars, and you end up feeding.
I personally never let small things bother me. I'm just kidding.
Low level of tolerance.
But I was in South Africa this summer. I don't know if I told this story on the podcast, so you'll remind me. But we went to a place called Kliptown, which is like the poorest part of Soweto, which is the poorest part of South Africa. I mean, it's unimaginable poverty, like what you see on TV and on the commercials for like
$1.37.
Yeah, if you give you could give $1, you could save a life. Yes, it's
you
really
save a town.
It's really abject poverty, and I do not want to romanticize poverty because it's horrible. But walking around Kliptown, I saw a group of women who were sitting together and they were laughing, and I mean they don't have toilets in their house. Like, you have to understand, like, there's porta potties set up around this community and they do not have plumbing in their houses, but they were sitting outside and they were laughing and they were selling things that they make by hand. So I bought a bunch of stuff. And one of the women was like, do you want to come into my house and see it? And of course, me, who's obsessed with Zillow, was like, I would love to come in. I wanted to see what their houses were like. And I mean, it was this tiny one room and she was so proud of it. And it was immaculate. I mean, it's clean. I would eat off the floor in there. Like, it was beautiful, but it was tiny and no plumbing and, and I thought to myself, like, don't be jealous of us. Like, I understand that physically we have a lot of advantages. I have a nice washing machine and dryer. I mean, they were doing laundry in a bucket, and we have so many advantages physically and materially. And all I thought about when I was looking at these women is, don't be jealous of us because we don't have what you have. And they were sitting there and they were just having a good time. They seemed so happy. And this woman was glowing from the inside out. She was just a lovely person and she seemed so happy. And I don't know. I always think about her now.
But one thing
I still complain, they
didn't have indoor plumbing, but they had an iPhone.
They
all of them had an iPhone. I promise you, if you said you could have your number, they would have an iPhone. That's one thing that Steve Jobs made sure that no matter how poor you are, you could have nothing, but you'll have an iPhone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there.
It's true. I wonder if the idea of assisted suicide is even a concept in like poor poor societies or it probably wouldn't be, right?
Why would they think about that?
Yeah.
This is a Western idea.
This is a secular humanist probably concept, right?
Sure, yeah. No question.
But I think in some Asian countries, suicide is a massive. Like, I think in Japan, it's a big issue.
Yeah.
Because
they have this honor.
Pressure, the pressure of living there and of accomplishment and of achievement.
Yeah, they have a big honor.
If you get a GED, your family throws you a big party at a swanky restaurant. He got his GED. But isn't he 31? Yeah, he's 31. But he had it rough. Well, why did he have it rough? I don't know. His brother's a doctor, so that's why he had it rough, because his brother's a doctor. So they throw you this big party at getting your GED at 31. In Japan, if you don't cure cancer by 19, you're a failure. What's wrong with you?
Well, it's an honor society. It's very different.
Very different. Yeah. Very different.
Okay. Right. Well, I think that look, I think the bottom line is that you need to have a rabbi on speed dial in case you have a life-threatening situation.
One thing is you need an advanced medical directive. That's what
it
would be.
Okay.
You have to sit down with your family, think this through. It's a very uncomfortable discussion.
Yeah.
Because it's talking about death, something that we avoid at all costs. But you need to sit down with your family and go through what you would like, how you would like it, sign the papers, make sure that it's legal, keep a copy in your house, and share it with your doctor, whatever it is, and take care of it, because you don't want the courts or you don't want the doctors to start making decisions for you. So these things are important to take into consideration. And there's logically ways of doing it. People think it's not. There's logically ways of doing it. Consult your local Orthodox rabbi for further information.
Awesome.
So we will make sure that our next episode is
a lighter topic.
Please come on,
a lighter topic.
Divorce, suicide.
Listen, these are issues that people are dealing with. We have to address them.
Aren't they dealing with like food? Can we talk about food?
Yes, we can talk about food.
Okay, good.
We actually haven't talked about food yet. We should.
I know we should do one on food.
Yeah, we should do an episode on that.
Yeah. I'll have a lot to say, more than
food is great.
Also, okay, we're finishing up Frankenstein. So if you're following along, please read Frankenstein, because we'll probably in 2 or 3 episodes talk about it. So if you want to read it before, now's the time.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good day.
Good Shabbos.
Bye, everybody.